My mom said her family was dead to us my whole life. Then I found secret birthday cards, a hidden college fund, and the shocking reason she thought they'd take me away forever. My mother's side of the family existed in my life the way old crime scenes exist in small towns. Nobody pointed at the house, but everybody knew not to walk too close to it. When I was a kid, I'd ask the obvious questions. Did mom have siblings? Grandparents? Cousins? Did they live far away? Were they dead? Did we ever see them when I was too little to remember? And every single time, my mother would go still for half a second before saying the same thing. It's complicated. Not angry. Not sad. Just flat. Final. My dad used to smooth it over with a joke. Your mom's family is like one of those canceled TV shows. Lots of drama, bad ending, nobody wants a reboot. He'd grin, kiss the top of my head, and that would be the end of it. Except it never really ended for me. Because kids can smell a lie even when they don't know the word for it yet. And it's complicated never sounded like the truth. It sounded like wallpaper pasted over a hole in the wall. Something temporary. Something hiding damage. I'm 31 now, and for most of my life I let it go. Partly because my mother, Mara, is not an easy woman to push. She loves hard, works hard, and keeps every vulnerable part of herself locked behind her ribs like she's guarding state secrets. Growing up with her meant understanding boundaries without them being explained to you. You learn them by touch. Push too far, and she wouldn't yell. She'd just shut down. Her voice would cool. Her eyes would lose focus. And suddenly you were standing in a room with someone who looked exactly like your mother, but felt miles away. So I stopped asking. Then my dad died 2 years ago. That sounds dramatic, like the beginning of everything. But grief is usually more boring than dramatic. It's paperwork and casseroles, and forgetting why you walked into rooms. It's watching one parent shrink while the other one disappears entirely. After dad died, my mother got quieter. Not softer, not more open, just thinner somehow, like a person becoming all edges. She started boxing up old photographs at weird hours. I'd come over after work and find entire shelves empty. Framed pictures gone. Albums missing. One night, I caught her feeding a stack of letters into the fireplace with the kind of concentration people usually reserve for surgery. I remember standing there in my socks, frozen in the hallway. What are those? Nothing you need. That answer did something ugly to me. Because I was 31 years old, and my father was gone, and my mother was still acting like my life had a locked room in it that I didn't have permission to enter. So I did something I'd never done before. I waited until she went upstairs, then pulled one half-burned envelope from the edge of the fireplace. The front was scorched black, but the middle survived. It had an address in Ohio, and one name, Evelyn Hart. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, was one word written so hard it had carved into the paper beneath it. Return. That should have been enough to scare me off. Instead, it was the first time in my life complicated stopped sounding like a warning and started sounding like a dare. So the next morning, while my mother was at work, I typed the name into a search bar. And for the first time in my life, my mother's family stopped being a ghost story. They became real people, and one of them was still alive. I found my grandmother in under 20 minutes. That was the part that made me feel sick. Not because it was hard, because it was easy. A property record, an old church bulletin, a Facebook page that hadn't been updated in 8 months, but still had photos of birthdays, Easter dinners, grandchildren in matching pajamas, smiling adults holding casserole dishes under warm kitchen lights. Normal people. That was the first surprise. I had spent my whole life assuming my mother's side was made up of monsters. Not necessarily abusive in the dramatic, movie villain way, but sharp people. Mean people. The kind who smile with their mouths and cut with everything else. The kind of family you escape and never look back on. But the photos didn't look like that. They looked aggressively ordinary. A white-haired woman in gardening gloves holding tomatoes the size of softballs. A broad-shouldered man in a veteran's cap asleep in a recliner with a toddler drooling on his shirt. 2 middle-aged women laughing over a birthday cake. Grandkids. Dogs. Cookouts. Ugly sweaters at Christmas. No visible cult. No prison tattoos. No caption reading "We emotionally destroyed your mother and would love to do it again." Just family. Which somehow made it worse. I stared at those photos far longer than I want to admit. Zooming in on faces. Looking for resemblance. A nose like mine. My mother's chin. Anything to explain why she had erased every one of them like they'd never existed. And there it was. One woman in particular. My mother's sister, apparently. Laurel. She had my mother's eyes. Not just the shape. The exact same look, like she'd already heard the question you were about to ask and decided not to answer it. That night, I told myself I was just being curious. That I wasn't doing anything wrong. That an adult woman was allowed to know where she came from. Then, 3 nights later, after 2 glasses of wine and too much silence in my apartment, I sent a message. Hi, this is going to sound strange, but I think I'm Mara Hart's daughter. I stared at it for a full minute before sending. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I half expected lightning, or my mother to somehow know instantly, like I'd tripped an alarm she'd buried in my bones at birth. Nothing happened, until the next morning. I woke up to 6 missed calls from an unknown Ohio number and 1 Facebook reply sent at 2:14 a.m. Oh my God, is this really Lena? Please call me. Please. I sat upright in bed so fast I got dizzy. There are moments when your life divides cleanly into before and after, and I knew, even then, that this was one of them. I called the number. A woman answered on the first ring, already crying. Lena. Her voice broke on my name like she'd been carrying it around for years. This is Laurel, she said. I'm your aunt. I should have hung up. I know that now. Instead, I sat there in my wrinkled t-shirt, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers hurt, and listened to a stranger cry because I existed. She kept saying things that made my chest tighten. We didn't know if you even knew about us. I can't believe you found me. Your grandmother is going to lose her mind. I asked the simplest question first. Why did my mom leave? Silence. Then Laurel inhaled shakily. That, she said, depends on which version she told you. My stomach dropped. She never told me any version. Another silence. Heavier this time. Oh, Laurel said quietly. Then she really did what we thought she did. What does that mean? But she didn't answer directly. She just said, Lena, honey, your mother didn't leave because we were monsters. That should have comforted me. Instead, it felt like somebody opening a trapdoor under my feet. For 2 weeks, I lied to my mother. I hate that part of the story, but it's true. I said I had weekend work. I said I was tired. I said I had a migraine and skipped Sunday dinner. Meanwhile, I was on the phone with relatives I had never met, collecting fragments of a life I apparently belonged to, but had somehow never lived. My grandmother, Evelyn, talked like she'd been waiting for the call since 1995. She was 80 now, frail but sharp, with a voice full of gravel and stubbornness. The first time we spoke, she asked me 3 questions in a row. Are you healthy? Are you happy? Does your mother know you called? I answered the first 2. The third I dodged. That was when I realized something else strange. Nobody on that side of the family sounded angry at my mother. Hurt, yes. Confused, definitely. Defensive sometimes. But not hateful. That messed with me more than if they'd just come out swinging. If they'd been cruel, it would have made sense. If they'd called her unstable or dramatic or ungrateful, I could have filed them neatly into the villain box and gone back to my life. But they didn't. My Aunt Laurel kept saying, your mom was under unbelievable pressure. My grandmother said. She thought she was doing the right thing. My mother's younger brother, Neil, who I finally spoke to on a Sunday afternoon, said, we all made mistakes. Some of us bigger than others. Nobody would say the actual thing. It was like pressing on a bruise everyone could feel, but nobody wanted to name. So I did what apparently runs in the women of my family. I pushed. I drove to Ohio. I told myself I just wanted closure. A look at them in person. Proof they were real, not just voices and filtered photos. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was uglier. I wanted to catch somebody lying. I wanted to walk into that house and feel it immediately. The rot, the manipulation, the hidden cruelty. I wanted some unmistakable signal that my mother had been right all along and I had nearly betrayed her for nothing. Instead, my grandmother opened the front door and looked at me like she'd seen a ghost she'd prayed for. Then she touched my face with both hands and started sobbing. Nobody had prepared me for that. Not the emotion, the recognition. Because she knew me. Not in the mystical way people say when they mean resemblance. I mean, she looked at me with the familiarity of someone whose grief had been shaped around my absence. Like I wasn't new. Like I was overdue. The house was warm and cluttered and smelled like coffee and cinnamon. There were family photos everywhere, and half of them included a space I could suddenly feel, like missing stair steps. My Aunt Laurel hugged me too long. My Uncle Neil shook my hand, then immediately pulled me into a hug because apparently handshakes were not enough for this family. 2 cousins came by with pie, just to say hi, and stared at me the way people stare at paintings they've heard about, but never seen in person. And still, nothing felt toxic. Complicated, yes. Charged, absolutely. But not evil. That afternoon, I sat at my grandmother's kitchen table while she poured coffee into a mug that said blessed and finally asked the question I should have asked sooner. What happened? The room changed. Not dramatically. Nobody shouted. Nobody dropped anything. But everyone went quiet in the specific way people do when a train they've been hearing for years finally reaches the station. My grandmother set the coffee pot down carefully. My Aunt Laurel looked at the table. Uncle Neil swore under his breath. Then my grandmother said, before we tell you anything, you need to understand one thing. I waited. She looked straight at me. Your mother did not cut us off because she hated us. I swallowed. Then why? My grandmother's eyes filled. Because she thought we were going to take you. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was insane. Take me, I said. Like kidnap me? No, Laurel said quickly. No, not like that. But my grandmother still looked stricken, which was somehow worse. I leaned back in the chair, suddenly cold all over. What exactly does that mean? Laurel sat down across from me and folded her hands together so tightly her knuckles went white. When you were born, your mom was 24. Your father had just left. He came back later. Yes, but at the time, she exhaled. At the time he panicked. He disappeared for months. I stared at her. My father had told me he and mom had hit a rough patch before I was born. That he'd been stupid and scared and had spent the rest of his life trying to make up for it. I knew he'd left for a while. I did not know it had been that bad. Your mother was alone, Laurel continued. Exhausted, not sleeping, barely eating. She had a newborn and no money and no clue whether your father was ever coming back. We were helping, or we thought we were helping. Something in the way she said thought made me sit up straighter. My grandmother picked up the story. Laurel had just lost a baby the year before, she said quietly. A little girl. Full term. The kitchen fell silent. I looked at Laurel. She nodded once, her face gone pale in a practiced way that told me grief had lived there a long time. I couldn't have children after that, she said. Complications. The doctors were clear. I didn't say anything. I didn't know how. My grandmother kept talking, and now the words were coming out like stones. Your mother was overwhelmed. You cried all the time. She cried all the time. There were days she wouldn't let anyone hold you, and days she'd hand you over and go sit in the bathtub fully clothed because she couldn't stop shaking. We were scared. For her, I asked. For both of you, Neil said. He had been standing by the sink this whole time, arms crossed, saying nothing. Now his voice was low and tired. She wasn't sleeping, Lena. She started saying people were watching the house. Saying if she closed her eyes, someone would take you. We thought it was postpartum depression. Maybe postpartum anxiety. Back then people didn't say the words right. And I asked. Laurel looked at me with tears in her eyes. And I said something I can never take back. Every muscle in my body locked. What? She swallowed. Hard. I said maybe it would be easier if I took you for a while. The room went so still I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. She didn't mean forever, my grandmother said immediately, too quickly. Laurel closed her eyes. But that's not how your mother heard it. No, of course it wasn't. I could see it without even trying. My mother, 24 and half feral with exhaustion, clinging to her baby while her grieving sister, who had just lost a child she desperately wanted, suggested taking mine. Not in a horror movie way. In a tired, practical, probably even loving way. Which honestly made it more terrifying. What happened next? I asked. Neil answered this time. Mom called a lawyer. I turned to him so fast my chair scraped the floor. What? My grandmother started crying again. Laurel covered her mouth. Neil didn't look away. Not to adopt you, he said. To ask questions. Temporary guardianship. Emergency custody. What options existed if Mara had some kind of breakdown? The air left my lungs. My grandmother whispered. We were scared she might hurt herself. But she didn't know that, I said. Nobody answered. Because of course she hadn't. To my mother, it would not have looked like concern. It would have looked like a plan. And suddenly the word complicated started to feel less like wallpaper and more like a fuse. I left that day with copies. That sounds colder than it was, but I'm trying not to dress any of this up. I asked if there was proof, and after a horrible silence, Neil disappeared upstairs and came back with an accordion folder that looked older than I was. Inside were photocopies of legal consultation notes, dated 6 weeks after my birth. Nothing had been filed. That detail mattered to all of them. They kept repeating it. Nothing was ever filed. No petition, no hearing, no action, just consultations. Questions. Hypotheticals. But on paper, hypotheticals look a lot like intent. One note said, maternal concern re. Instability, sleep deprivation, possible risk of neglect. Another, aunt and grandparents willing to assume short-term care if necessary. And there, in a clipped attorney summary, the sentence that sat in my stomach like glass all the way home. Mother appears resistant to relinquishing child despite family support concerns. Resistant to relinquishing child. That was how a stranger had written my mother. Like she was the problem for not handing me over. When I got back to my apartment, I put the folder on my kitchen table and just stared at it for almost an hour. I should have called my mother then. I know I should have. Instead, I kept digging. Because now that I had one piece, I wanted the whole body. Over the next week, more details emerged. My dad had left when my mother was 7 months pregnant after a fight so bad nobody in the family would tell me exactly what had been said. He came back 3 months after I was born, ashamed and desperate, and genuinely changed by all accounts. But by then the damage had already been done. My mother had been living in her old bedroom with a bassinet beside the bed and a baby monitor she refused to trust. She slept with me on her chest because she was convinced if she put me down, I would stop breathing. She checked the locks 6, 7, 10 times a night. She accused Neil of moving my diapers to confuse her. She once screamed at my grandmother for warming a bottle because she thought it meant they were trying to get me used to someone else. That part was hard to hear. Not because it made her sound crazy, because it made her sound terrified. And terror, when you're living inside it, can look an awful lot like madness to everyone else. That was the pattern I kept seeing the more people talked. Nobody had been trying to be cruel in the cartoonish sense. They had been frightened, grieving, overwhelmed, stepping all over each other's pain with what they thought were practical decisions. My Aunt Laurel had lost a baby and was drowning in the kind of grief that makes ordinary boundaries feel negotiable. My grandparents were older, tired, religious, and deeply convinced that family could solve anything if the right adults took charge. My mother was 24, abandoned, hormonally wrecked, sleep-deprived, and clinging to the only thing in the world that felt like hers. And I was the center of the collision. Then came the part one wasn't expecting. My grandmother asked to see me again before I left town for good, so I drove back the next Saturday. She handed me an old photo album and told me to take it home. "I think it belongs to you now," she said. Inside were baby photos I had never seen. Me in a yellow sleeper. Me asleep on my father's chest when he finally came back. Me in Laurel's arms, her expression soft and broken at the same time. Me in my mother's lap, eyes red-rimmed, holding me like someone gripping the edge of a roof. Then, tucked in the back, a stack of unopened birthday cards. Every year, every birthday, from them. Some had little notes on the envelopes. "In case she comes back, please keep safe. For Lena when she's older." I looked up so fast my neck hurt. "You sent these?" My grandmother nodded. "To your mother's old address first. Then later to AP. Oh, box your father gave us once when he thought maybe." She trailed off. "He knew?" Now Laurel looked miserable. "Not at first. Later, yes. Your father was the only reason we knew you were alive." That knocked something loose in me. Because suddenly this wasn't just about what my mother had done. It was about what my father had known. And kept. I went to my parents' house on a Wednesday night with the folder in my tote bag and the photo album on the passenger seat like evidence I wasn't sure I wanted admitted. My mother was in the kitchen chopping onions. That detail sticks with me because it was so ordinary. The smell, the cutting board, the little pile of papery skins near the sink. My whole world was tilting and she was making soup. She looked up when I walked in. "You're early." I set the album on the table. Her hand stopped. Not dramatically, just froze with the knife midair. Then I put down the folder. And that was it. That was the moment the room changed. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she put the knife down very carefully and said, "Where did you get those?" I had rehearsed this conversation in the car. I had speeches, questions, a whole courtroom in my head. What came out instead was, "You lied to me." My mother's face closed instantly. "No," she said. "I kept something from you. That's lying." She looked at the album, then at me. "Did you go to Ohio?" I hated that she could still make me feel 12 with one question. "Yes." Her jaw tightened. "You had no right." I actually laughed at that. A sharp, ugly sound. "No right. They're my family." "They are not your family." I stared at her, and there it was. Not grief, not fear, anger, real anger. Something in me went cold. "That's insane," I said. "They loved me." My mother flinched like I'd slapped her. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Then tell me." Because all I've had my whole life is, it's complicated, and apparently complicated means your mother called a lawyer about taking me, and your sister thought maybe it would be easier if she kept your baby. "Stop." She said it so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Then louder. "Stop." I had never seen my mother go pale that fast. She gripped the edge of the counter, breathing too shallow. For one awful second I thought she was going to faint, and some terrified child part of me wanted to rush forward, apologize, take it all back. But I didn't. Because I was 31, and I was done being handled by silence. "So it's true," I said. My mother looked at me with a kind of exhausted fury I'll never forget. Not the way they told it. "Then how?" She pressed both hands flat on the counter and stared past me. "When you were 6 weeks old," she said. "I woke up from 20 minutes of sleep and found my sister in my room holding you." I stopped breathing. She thought I was asleep. My mother continued. "She was standing by the window whispering to you, saying things like, 'It's okay, baby, Aunt Laurel's got you. You'll be safe with me. I know what to do.'" The kitchen felt suddenly too small. She didn't know I was awake. She didn't know I heard her. And maybe she meant nothing by it. Maybe it was grief talking. Maybe it was exhaustion. I do not care. My mother finally looked at me. Because that was the moment I knew if I stayed in that house, I was going to lose you. My mouth went dry. She never told me that. Of course she didn't. The words hit harder than they should have, because I realized, with a kind of sick clarity, that this whole time I had been waiting for one version to be true. Either my mother had lied, or they had. But the worst possibility was standing right in front of me. Maybe everyone was telling the truth as they lived it. And maybe that was the problem. Once my mother started, she didn't stop. Maybe because the secret was already broken open. Maybe because she was too tired to hold it shut anymore. Or maybe because she saw my face and realized that if she didn't tell me everything now, she was going to lose me in a different way. She told me about the first week after I was born, when she would wake up convinced I'd died and press 2 fingers under my nose until I cried. She told me about Laurel insisting she take sleeping pills just one night, while someone else watched me, and how that sounded less like rest and more like surrender. She told me about hearing my grandmother on the phone with a lawyer and standing in the hallway with milk leaking through her shirt while strangers discussed whether she was stable enough to keep her own baby. She told me my Uncle Neil tried to calm things down, but he was 20 and stupid and thought saying, "Nobody's trying to steal her," somehow fixed the fact that it already felt exactly like that. And then she told me the part that made my skin go cold. 2 days before she left, she found a bag packed in the hall closet. My diaper bag. Stocked. Bottles. Formula. Wipes. A change of clothes. Copies of my birth certificate paperwork. She turned to Laurel and asked why. And Laurel, already crying, said, "In case you need help." My mother's laugh then, sitting across from me at the kitchen table all these years later, was the saddest sound I've ever heard. "Maybe that's all it was," she said. "Maybe they never would have done anything. Maybe it was grief and panic and terrible judgment. But Lena, I was not sleeping. I was not thinking clearly. I knew that. And still, through all of it, the one thing I was sure of was this. If I stayed, they were going to convince everyone I was unfit, and once that happened, I would never get you back. So you ran." "Yes." Without ever letting me know them. Her face hardened. "I kept you." The room went still again. It was the first time I understood that my mother and I were not actually arguing about facts. We were arguing about cost. To her, the cost of staying had been the risk of losing me. To me, the cost of leaving had been growing up with a blank half of myself and no explanation. Both were real. Neither canceled the other. I sat down slowly because my knees felt weak. Dad knew. My mother looked away. He found us after 3 months. And he still helped keep them away? He agreed with me. Did he? That came out sharper than I intended. My mother's eyes flashed. He knew what state I was in. He knew what I heard. He knew they had already spoken to a lawyer. Yeah, but he also knew they sent birthday cards. He knew they wanted contact. She went very still. That was answer enough. My father, the warm, funny, peacekeeping father I adored, had not just known. He had chosen sides. Quietly. Consistently. For years. And suddenly his absence hurt in a fresh way. Not because he was gone. Because he wasn't here to explain himself. My mother saw something change in my face, and her expression shifted too. Not softer. More frightened. "Lena," she said carefully, "what exactly did they tell you?" So I told her about the cards. The photos. The fact that nobody sounded monstrous. The fact that my grandmother cried when she saw me. The fact that Laurel looked like she had been punishing herself for decades. My mother listened without interrupting. Then she said the sentence that split the room in half. "Good people can still take your child." I stared at her. And the horrible thing was, I understood exactly what she meant. I just wasn't sure that understanding it meant forgiving everything that came after. For a week after that, I didn't answer anyone. Not my mother. Not Laurel. Not Grandma Evelyn. Not even my best friend, Tessa, who finally texted, "Either you joined a cult or you're spiraling." Blinked twice. I was spiraling. Because every version of the story I had now contained love, fear, and bad decisions in different proportions, and I didn't know what to do with that. It would have been easier if someone had been evil. If Laurel had openly wanted my mother's baby, because she lost her own. If my grandparents had set out to bulldoze a vulnerable woman because they thought older meant wiser. If my mother had lied out of spite instead of terror. But that wasn't what I had. I had a grieving aunt who crossed emotional lines so badly that my mother felt hunted in her own home. I had grandparents who mistook legal preparedness for care and didn't understand how threatening it looked from the inside. I had a mother in postpartum freefall, already abandoned once, who heard one wrong sentence at the wrong time and built her life around never letting it happen again. And I had a father who came back, saw the wreckage, chose my mother, and helped seal the whole thing shut. All of them made sense. That was the unbearable part. Then my grandmother called from a hospital room. That's how the silence broke. It wasn't an emergency, nothing dramatic, but she'd fallen getting out of bed and cracked her wrist. My Aunt Laurel was with her, and somehow hearing their voices together, ordinary and tired and worried about insurance forms, yanked me right back into the mess. I drove out that weekend. Laurel met me in the hospital cafeteria because, as she put it, your grandmother will cry too much if we talk in front of her. She looked older than she had 2 weeks earlier. Smaller, somehow. We sat down with burnt coffee and stale muffins nobody touched. I talked to my mom, I said. Laurel nodded once. I figured. She said she found you holding me in her room at night. Laurel closed her eyes. I did. I waited. I wasn't trying to take you, she said. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know how it looked. But I wasn't. What were you doing? Her eyes filled immediately, which made me angrier than it should have. Pretending, she whispered. For a minute. Just for a minute. There it was. Not a clean evil. Not an innocent misunderstanding. Something worse. Something painfully human and therefore much harder to dismiss. She kept talking anyway, voice shaking. I had lost my daughter 10 months earlier. Everyone was terrified for your mother, but nobody was looking at me either. I was drowning. And then there you were, alive, warm, breathing. And for a few stupid, selfish moments, I let myself imagine. She wiped her face hard. Not forever. I swear to you. But enough that your mother saw it. Enough that she was right to be scared. I sat frozen. Because this was the first direct admission anyone had made. Not to a plan. To desire. And desire can be enough. Laurel looked at me like she expected me to walk out. Instead I asked, would you have fought for me? Her answer took too long. Not because she was inventing it. Because she was telling the truth. I don't know, she said. That honesty hit harder than any denial could have. Because now I understood my mother's decision in my bones. And still I couldn't stop thinking. If everyone knew how dangerous it had gotten, why did nobody ever try to tell me once I was old enough to understand? Why was protecting me allowed to become keeping me? The second twist, the one that really finished me off, came from my Uncle Neil. I almost didn't meet him. By that point, I was emotionally skinned alive, and one more family confession felt less like healing and more like being nibbled to death by ducks. But he called and said, there's something your mother probably doesn't know, and if you're going to hate us, I'd rather you do it with complete information. So I met him at a diner off the highway. He ordered black coffee and pie and looked like every middle-aged man who has spent 20 years pretending he's fine because nobody asked twice. He slid an envelope across the table. Inside were bank records. Not recent ones. Old ones. Photocopies. Monthly transfers into an education account opened in my father's name when I was 5. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. I looked up. What is this? Neil rubbed his jaw. Your college fund. My dad and mom paid for college. Not all of it. I stared at him. Your grandmother contributed some. So did I? And Laurel. I felt suddenly nauseous. My father knew. Neil nodded. He didn't want money changing hands directly. Thought your mother would see it and burn the world down. So he called it anonymous family support and used it for tuition and your books. I couldn't even process the layers of betrayal in that sentence. My mother had hidden them from me. My father had hidden me from them, and then secretly let them love me sideways. Neil watched my face carefully. We didn't do it to buy anything, he said. We knew we weren't entitled to you. He stopped, then tried again. Lena, we lost you, but you were still ours in the ways we could manage. I should have been moved. Part of me was. Another part wanted to flip the table. Because if they could help pay for my future, if they could send cards, if my father could maintain this shadow contact for years, then everyone in my life had apparently decided I was mature enough to be shaped by the consequences of this secret without ever being trusted with the secret itself. That was what shattered something in me. Not one lie. The system of lies. The architecture of protection. Every adult choosing what version of reality I could bear, while I lived inside the outcome. I drove to my mother's house that night in a storm. Not because I had a plan, because rage has excellent GPS. She opened the door already tense, like she knew by the look on my face that whatever this was, it wasn't small. Dad took money from them, I said. Her expression changed so fast, it almost looked like pain. What? For my college? For years? No. Yes. She stepped back like the floor had moved. I realized then, with a strange, cold clarity, that my father had not just helped her bury the past. He had edited it. For both sides. And whatever peace he'd built with those edits had died with him, leaving the rest of us to step through the wreckage. My mother sat down hard in the hallway chair and looked suddenly, shockingly old. He told me he'd cut all contact, she whispered. I believed her. That was the worst part. I believed her. Which meant she had been loyal to a story even he hadn't fully lived by. And for the first time in my life, I looked at my mother not as the keeper of the truth, but as one more person trapped inside it. I wish I could give you a cleaner ending. A confrontation. A forgiveness scene. A perfect verdict where I stand up in the court of my own blood and declare exactly who was right and who was wrong. That is not what happened. What happened is smaller and worse. My grandmother went home from the hospital. I visited her once more. My mother hasn't forgiven my father, which is complicated for obvious reasons because he's dead and therefore can't defend himself or apologize or explain why he thought secret half-contact was kinder than truth. Laurel wrote me a letter I still haven't answered. In it, she said, "Your mother was right to be afraid of me then. I would never hurt you now. I don't know if both things can be true, but I think they are." I have read that sentence 12 times. Because I think it's the whole story in one line. My mother and I still speak. We still have dinner some Sundays. She still makes soup when she's anxious. I still love her with the kind of muscle-deep certainty that survives almost anything. But something has shifted. Before, I thought loyalty meant accepting her silence as proof she had reasons. Now I know the reasons. And I'm no longer sure loyalty means agreeing with what she did next. I understand why she ran. I understand why she never wanted me near people who, in her mind, had once stood too close to the edge of taking me. I understand that fear hardens into principle when you live with it long enough. I even understand why she believed that telling me later would only reopen danger. But I also know what it cost. It cost me grandparents who saved every birthday card. It cost me cousins I might have grown up with. It cost me the knowledge that my father, flawed and human and trying, had kept one foot in both worlds because maybe even he understood that total severance was too blunt an instrument for a wound this messy. Most of all, it cost me the right to decide for myself what to do with my own inheritance. That's the part one can't smooth over. Because the truth didn't protect me from pain. It protected me from choice. And now I have it anyway, decades late, heavier than it would have been if someone had just trusted me sooner. Last Sunday, my mother stood at her sink peeling carrots while rain tapped against the kitchen window. She didn't look at me when she asked, "Are you going to keep seeing them?" I told her the truth. "I don't know." She nodded once, like she'd expected nothing else. Then after a long silence, she said, "If you do, be careful. Not angry, not controlling, just afraid." And I looked at this woman who once fled with a baby because love and fear had become indistinguishable, and I felt two things at the exact same time: compassion and resistance. I think that's where the story ends, at least for now. Not with resolution, with tension, between the mother who protected me and the woman who decided what protection meant, between the family that may have loved me badly and the mother who loved me so fiercely she made herself the only safe place left. I found the truth. I understand her now. I'm just no longer sure understanding is the same thing as agreement.